Welcome back, A-Pushers. This is Mr. Crayson coming at you with foreign policy in this fledgling brand new American nation. So we're coming off of this major war with Britain for independence, and we are worn thin. So we are not going to be looking for more trouble for quite some time. And for that reason, neutrality will be the pattern. As the first president, Washington gets to pick his first cabinet of all time, so your advisors. And as Secretary of Treasury, you got Alexander Hamilton, who is very much aligned ideologically with Washington. And you have Thomas Jefferson, who's going to be Secretary of State. There are other cabinet positions, but those two guys are the ones I'm going to mention right now because they will face off against each other continually, creating a division that will be the first two parties here in the United States. So the Federalists of Hamilton and the Democratic Republicans of Thomas Jefferson. One of the main issues they'll disagree upon is regarding, you guessed it, foreign policy. If you remember the Battle of Saratoga, New York in 1777, that's when the French were convinced to join the U.S. in the Franco-American alliance in 1778. Since France's direct involvement helped turn the tide of the war, there was a sentiment that the young American nation owed it to France to assist in its French Revolution in 1789. And in the musical Hamilton, we see Federalists and Democratic Republicans facing off over this issue, specifically the song Cabinet Battle Number 2. We hear Hamilton dissing Jefferson in the following line, where he dismisses the Franco-American alliance, saying, "If you think the president is going to bring the nation to the brink of meddling in the middle of a military mess, a game of chess where France is queen and kingless, we've seen a treaty with a king whose head is now in a basket. Would you like to take it out and ask it? Oh, we honor our treaty, King Louis's head? Do whatever you want. I'm super dead." There is, did have a Franco-American alliance in 1778, but it was to the King of France, who is now dead. And so what the Washington administration ends up doing is Hamilton helps pen the Proclamation of Neutrality, which this Neutrality Proclamation will say, we are not getting involved in other nations' battles in Europe. We are staying neutral. At this time, Thomas Jefferson is going to actually resign as Secretary of State. He's not happy with the direction Federalists are guiding the government. A spicy situation also in 1793 is the Citizen Guinea affair. So you have this diplomat from France, Edmond Guiney, and he is really upset with the Proclamation of Neutrality. He sees diplomacy is not working. He goes to the streets. He starts meeting with American citizens. He's going to like taverns and giving speeches in these taverns, beckoning them to join the French war effort. He's going to American privateers and trying to sway them to get involved in the conflict. So this is not okay. This is really inappropriate behavior for a diplomat from another country. And even Jefferson, who is really partial to France, is upset by this, thinks it's overstepping. He thinks Guiney should be removed from his position as a diplomat, and he is. The Jay Treaty of 1794 is going to upset those who are on the side of France as well. The Treaty of 1783 from the American Revolution promised that the British would get out of the Ohio River Valley and the remaining areas of American territory. And they didn't. They were loitering around. They were hanging out still. There were forts, British forts that were still manned. And the Jay Treaty, one of the elements of it was to get them out of there. Another element was a lot of ships were taken and the cargo stolen. We wanted the British to pay us back for that here in America. The British were also arming Native Americans, and that's not cool from the American perspective. The U.S. wanted to continue to be able to have trading rights in the British West Indies, and that will be ensured by this treaty as well. And finally, impressment. A quick word on impressment. This concept is far out. So essentially, American sailors would be, their ships would be intercepted by the British, and the British would not only take cargo and such, but they would take men off the ship and impress them into the British Navy. So the choice they gave you was you could either fight for the British Navy or go to prison in Britain. And if you're thinking this is ridiculous, it's because it is. These were American sailors. We're a free, independent nation here in America now. But so that was part of the Jay Treaty too, was asking for that to stop. Interestingly enough, that won't happen. Impressment won't be mentioned in the Jay Treaty. So all those other things will be addressed, but impressment won't. And spoilers, this is going to end up being one of the key reasons why the United States goes to war with Britain in the War of 1812. So everything's France and Britain, France and Britain. Well, Spain is going to enter into the mix here as well with Pinckney's Treaty. So here, farmers in the West would love to have access to the Mississippi River and be able to freely move through the port of New Orleans. And at this time, that's not possible. And Spain is charging a duty, a tax on shipments going through the port of New Orleans. So the Pinckney Treaty, one of the aims was try to get the right to free passage through New Orleans, and Spain will say yes to that in this Pinckney Treaty. Charles Pinckney will also add in that we should establish a clear border between Spanish Florida and the rest of the American states at this point. And so they will, and they'll make that the 31st North parallel, or the line of latitude 31 degrees north. 1796 comes, and we have another presidential election. George Washington's not going to run a third time. Whoa. So at the end of Washington's presidency, he also starts another tradition. He writes a farewell address. And Alexander Hamilton helped pen this address to the nation that was published in newspapers and such. And he established two things here. Don't create political factions or political parties. Well, too late. That was already happening under his presidency, in fact. However, he also stresses don't get involved in entangling foreign alliances. And the reason is you're going to get pulled into wars, conflicts. A cute way of remembering this is Washington wants us to stay safe. So the acronym SAFE, stay away from entanglements. And guess what? The United States does. French Revolution, we don't get involved. Napoleonic Wars, we don't get involved. All the way up to World War I, we don't want to get involved here in the United States. We get pulled in against our will to some degree. World War II, same thing. Pearl Harbor pulls the United States in. Up to that point, they're trying to stay neutral with the Axis and Allied powers. So it becomes this pattern. And it's only after World War II where we here in the United States start to make these permanent alliances. We joined the United Nations in 1945. We joined NATO in 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But that was not the pattern early on. So right out of the gates, John Adams as president is faced with foreign policy issues. And one is called the XYZ affair. So the story here is back in 1797. American ships are being taken by the French if they're on their way to Britain. President Adams sends diplomats over to France to hammer out an agreement, and the French diplomats instead say, hold the phone, we're not going to even begin talking about this until you pay us a little bribe. The United States diplomats are appalled and they leave, and ultimately this gets leaked out to the papers, and the papers never find out the names of the French diplomats, so the papers call them X, Y, and Z. So this is called the XYZ affair. One of the big ideas coming out of this is that people here in America, the public starts to get some anti-French sentiment going. They're upset. They're really thrown off by this. And there's a saying, millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute, which is saying, like, we'll go to war with France over these issues before we ever pay them a bribe. The Federalists are going to ride that anti-French sentiment into getting some really infamous laws passed here. As a set, they're known as the Alien and Sedition Acts, but there's quite a few things here. The Naturalization Act of 1798 is grouped with these. It took the requirement of living here for 5 years in the U.S. to living here for 14 years before you can apply for citizenship. What does that do? It hurts the Democratic Republicans who had a large immigrant base. The Alien Act in 1798 was also passed, and this essentially made it really easy to deport an alien, an immigrant who's not a citizen here, for very little evidence against them. So if they were deemed dangerous, they could be deported. And the Sedition Act, same year, this violated the First Amendment very clearly. It said you couldn't speak out against the president or Congress. The Democratic Republicans are seething. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison lead this charge against these laws. And Jefferson will write a resolution stating that the Constitution has been violated. Compact theory of government, where states are agreeing to be part of this nation, has been violated. So the Kentucky resolution that Jefferson wrote says Kentucky hereby nullifies these laws. They're not going to follow them. There was no judicial review yet, so the courts would have caught this, said it was against the First Amendment and gotten rid of it, said it was unconstitutional, but the courts don't yet have judicial review power. That's not until 1803 with Marbury versus Madison. Meanwhile, Jefferson's buddy, James Madison, writes a resolution for Virginia, and it says the same. So this starts a precedent of nullification that's going to come back down the road, guys. It's going to come back in 1832 when there's a tariff that South Carolina doesn't like, and they're going to say they're nullifying this tariff. It's going to come back in 1861 when President Lincoln is taking office, and South Carolina once again is going to say this is not okay. We're not good with this. So nullification precedent is a pretty big deal. Last but not least, what of the Native Americans? So at this time, Native Americans, even though they're on American soil, are treated as a foreign group, a foreign entity. After the British lose the American Revolution, in many ways, the natives did too, because natives banded together with the British against the Americans. And so it's sort of just assumed that the natives have lost alongside Britain. In the Ohio River Valley, you're going to have the Battle of Fallen Timbers, where the Northwest Indian Confederation will face off against this young American nation, and the American forces will win. And the U.S. will buy off of them what would end up becoming Ohio, Chicago, Detroit, and the other Great Lakes region areas, the Northwest Territories. This presents a continuity over time, the pattern of conflict between Native Americans and the American armies, and you will continuously see Native Americans losing ground and being pushed west. That closes out early American foreign policy. Have a great rest of the day.